Hi everyone, it's Caroline here, and welcome to our very first lesson on Anglo-Saxon and Norman England. Now, this is a fantastic topic. It's a really fascinating bit of English history. We're going to start off with the Anglo-Saxons. They're kind of minding their own business, hang out in England, which is super rich at this time. And that's really the root of the problem that they have, that England is such a wealthy country. We're doing lots of trade. We've got lots of sheep farming going on. We're known for our wool. And other people want that for themselves. So we've got the Vikings who keep making an appearance coming from Scandinavia, from Denmark. And we're also going to have the Normans who are going to take over in 1066. So, the start of our course, we're going to have a little look at what's going on in Anglo-Saxon society. Life's going quite normally for people, quite calmly. There's not a lot going on. They don't know it is all about to kick off in 1066. So, we're going to have the Anglo-Saxon king. It's going to die. There's not going to be an obvious choice to be next king. And so what we get is the very best fighters in Europe, all descending on England, fighting each other for who can be king. So that's what we've got coming up. We're going to start off having a little look in this lesson about what was the Anglo-Saxon society like. So by the end of it, you can explain the key features of Anglo-Saxon society. So first up, I've got a couple of pictures just to show you the kind of world we are living in. We are very much back in time, so we can see that how simple the houses are, how simple day-to-day life is. So houses are made of something called wattle and daub, so it's sticks, mud, thatched roofs that you can see there. So thatched roofs with hay that are used to keep the rain out. So you might have one building in the area that would be made out of stone. Certainly the church might be, or the very fancy person, the lord of the manor, might have a house of stone. But most people are going to be living in houses like this. So one room, you're going to have a pen at one end because when it becomes winter, you're going to want to bring your animals in with you because it's too cold for them to stay out over winter. You've got a fire in the middle of the room for warmth. Obviously, there's no electricity at this point. We're hundreds and hundreds of years off electricity. And so what they don't have is fridges, freezers, ways to keep food for long periods of time. So what most Saxon people are doing is farming. And you are really reliant on every year having a good harvest. So if the harvest is bad one year, you can't store food, remember, it's going to cause you real problems. So your year is built around farming, and a really important time is going to be harvest, sort of September, October, when you bring in all the crops for next year. So if you tuck that fact away in your head, it's going to become really important later on when the king dies. So if you're alive in Anglo-Saxon times, most likely we'd have been these kind of people. So peasant farmers working the field, living in really small communities. So most people live in the countryside and you're living in villages, maybe 10, 12 houses. So really small communities. You are seeing the same people day in, day out. Your choice of who you marry is very limited to the local area, and you're really not traveling much. Maybe you'll go to the nearest town if you've got a reason to. So maybe you're taking produce for market. If you do, though, you're walking. If you're very fancy, you have a horse. But their world is so much smaller than our world is today. You are going to be caught up in your village and maybe a few of the surrounding villages. And life will look very similar day after day, year after year. So there are some big towns. And we're going to have a look at them, some big cities. Up on the board, I've drawn you a map. You can see right in the middle there with the grey outline, that is London Borough. So that's London at the time, and you can see the Thames underneath it. You can also see some of the names that are quite sort of familiar to us. So off to the left, we've got Paddington. We've also off to the right got Grenwick, which is now Greenwich. Down south, we've got Camberwell. So there are some settlements that are still around today. So some of the areas that we're really famous for were settled, but they are really rural. So by rural, countryside, small villages, lots of trees. In those big cities, by our standards, they're really small. So we can see London there is a tiny percentage of what it was today. So there are towns, there are cities, they're much smaller than they are today. And normally they're used for trade. So people go there to trade with other people, most people living out in the countryside. So London's there, City of York's also important. We're going to go visit York a few times. And there's places that have importance for other reasons. So Winchester's really important because it's where the royal treasury or all the money is. So very different world from us today, and also very different social structure. And that's what I've put on the board at the moment. Unfortunately for us, because we have to learn it, there are 6 different levels. The good news is William the Conqueror is going to come in with the Normans, sweep this away and make it much, much simpler. But this is the social system. So we've got the king right at the top. The king is the most powerful. Underneath him, earls. Underneath them, thanes. Now, if for English you're doing Macbeth, it's exactly the same. They're local lords, but it's spelt differently. So thanes. Underneath them are ceorls. There's very few of those. The vast majority of people are villains, peasant farmers. So nothing to do with villain as in like bad person. It's got an E. So villains. They're just peasant farmers. And then down at the bottom, unfortunately, we have thralls or enslaved people. So let's look at these in more detail. So we've got the king. How powerful he is very much depends on the king. So if you want an easy life, a nice calm life, being an Anglo-Saxon king is not it. You're going to be at risk all the time of someone trying to steal your throne. You're going to have big problems with the Vikings. So strong kings, you're going to find it a lot easier. Weak kings, there are going to be a lot of people circling you, trying to take your place. And this is something that's going to be really important later on. So succession is not guaranteed. So succession is a word that the exam board aren't going to define for you. They want you to know what that is. So succession just means who's coming next. So we're really familiar with eldest child inherits. So we know King Charles III, once he's died and he isn't king anymore, we know that Prince William, is going to be the next king, and that's set in stone. Anglo-Saxon times totally different, and it made for quite awkward situations. So, if the king happened to have an eldest son who had reached adult age, was really strong, got on well with everyone, they are pretty much a shoo-in. They are going to be the next one, but not guaranteed. So they have a phrase called atheling. So lots of people, lots of men at this time are called atheling, and we're going to meet a few along the way. So you would be first name atheling, and really it means prince, but the actual word means throne worthy, someone who potentially could be getting the throne. And no one knew until after the king died and the king's council chose who it would be. So it did make for some awkward relationships between brothers, half brothers, cousins. They all sort of knew that they had a chance. Also, remember at this time, medicine is very, very poor. So people who seem very healthy could die very quickly. So just because someone seems like a great candidate, maybe the king's eldest son's looking good, there's no guarantee that he will outlive his father. So the throne was always, to an extent, up for grabs, if you like, and that's going to cause huge problems. So just underneath the king, you've got the earls. So these are incredibly powerful men. They own enormous areas of land. So an earl is like a high-ranking lord. So they own today what would be counties and counties of England. So enormous tracts of land. And in Anglo-Saxon times, land equals power. So from the land you get the taxes. You're also entitled to men to fight for you. So money, fighting men, power. And if you've got a weak king and you've got strong earls, that can be really problematic. So there's very few of them. They're just under king. Everybody knew who they were. There were only a handful of them. Far more thanes. So these are local lords. So within, say, what would be now a county, you'd have one earl who owns the land, is in charge of the land, and then you would have local lords underneath with their own smaller bits of land that they administer. So they owe loyalty to an earl, they owe loyalty to the king. So more thanes than earls, but the vast majority of people are in this section. So carls and villeins. So they are peasant farmers. So villeins are the peasant farmers. And they're tied to the land. So what this means, and it's a horrible idea, you can't leave. So you're a villein, you're a peasant farmer in a village. You cannot leave that village without permission from your local lord. You can't get married without permission from the local lord. There are even some hairstyles you couldn't have if you were a villein. So their world is completely controlled by the local lord. Those are just some examples of the rules. There are lots more. So if you don't like where you're living and you want to move, that is tough. Unless the local lord says you can go, and he's not likely to do that because he wants you working for his fields. So most people are villeins, but you do get this group called the curls. So the curls are free farmers. They can move around. So day-to-day life going to be just like the villeins, but if they want to move, they can do. Okay, so most people are Anglo-Saxon times, curls and villeins. So farmers, peasant farmers, curls are free to move around. And then last, we have the thralls, so enslaved people. At this time, about 10% of the population are enslaved. So the Saxon word for them is thralled, we would say enslaved, 10% of the population. The good news is William the Conqueror is going to come and he is going to ban it. So it takes a few generations for it to die out, but the Normans, they are going to get rid of enslaving people. So this is the social structure. Okay, so the kings, you've got the lords, the really fancy one, and the earls, the local lords, the thanes. Most people are curls and villeins. So most people are villeins. Small percentage of them, the lucky ones, get to be curls, and about 10% are enslaved. The sort of good thing about Anglo-Saxon society was it was really fluid. People could move up and people could move down. So if you were a peasant farmer who worked really hard, you had really good harvest, you got money, you could buy enough land to work your way up to being a local lord. Similarly, you could go down. So if you were experiencing real hardship, you might sell yourself into slavery. And that way it sounds strange that anyone would willingly become enslaved, but your master then has to provide you with food. And if you are on the brink of starvation, that might seem appealing. So there we have it, the Anglo-Saxon world. We're going to explore it a bit more in the next few lessons, but that's an introduction into the world that we're going to be looking at.